Dancing is dangerous. Now, dancing might not be the first activity that comes to mind when you think of transgression. But in some societies, it is deemed so dangerous that attempts are made to control it, for fear that it might corrupt morals. For hundreds of years, people in authority have controlled who can dance, who can interact with dancers, and the type of dancing that people can do. It's amazing. In certain circumstances, dancing has been banned altogether. Even now, in England and Wales, you must have a premises licence if you intend to provide a space for people to dance in. How bonkers is that? Otherwise, you could be fined £1,000, sent to prison for up to 6 months, or both. In Sweden, a dance permit was required for public dance events up until 2016, when the Swedish Parliament, the Riksdag, very wisely voted unanimously to do away with this law. In August 2012, 17 people paid the ultimate price for dancing. They were beheaded by the Taliban for taking part in an activity that is forbidden by Islamic law, dancing in a mixed gender group. Islamic law does not prohibit dancing per se. In fact, there is a long tradition of dancing in Muslim cultures, but there are certain circumstances where dancing is absolutely forbidden. Dancing is seen as abominable wherever alcohol is present, where men and women are gathering together, if the movements are languid or effeminate, and if it's done to excess. In all other conditions, dancing is fine. For example, Islam permits a woman to dance in front of her husband to please or arouse him, but she mustn't dance in front of other men or women. The rationale for not dancing in front of other women is that it might lead to unwanted temptation and attraction. One fatwa, a ruling on a point of Islamic law, states, with regard to dancing on the part of women, it is an evil action and we cannot say that it is permissible, because we have heard of incidents that have occurred among women because of it. If it is done by men, that is even worse, because that is men imitating women, and the evil involved is well known. If dancing is done among a mixed group of men and women, as some of the foolish do, that is even worse, because the mixing and great fitna involved, especially when that is done at a wedding party. Many religious groups have a problem with dancing. Christian sects, through history, have seen it as the devil's work, and tales of its destructive effects have been recounted as warnings. Dancing, with its implications of physical and mental freedom, does not fit within the solemn strictures of most traditional religions. And any sort of dancing which ventures into a public space and catches a mood, drawing in large numbers of other people, can easily seem dangerous. Take the story of a certain Frau Troffea, who one day in 1518 went down to the riverbank in Strasbourg and began to dance. She danced alone, and no music could be heard. She seemed to be in her own world, moving frenetically to the rhythms in her head for apparently several days. Gradually, the townfolk began to gather around, mesmerised by her performance, and one by one they joined in, until there was a heaving mass dancing on the riverbank, non-stop, day and night. The riverbank became drenched in blood, as the dancers' feet blistered and split. And by the time the dancing frenzy was over, some 30 days later, dozens had dropped dead. No one knows why Frau Troffea started to dance on the riverbank, or what caused hundreds of people to join in with her, but this story is not unique. There are many stories of similar dancing plagues in history. The earliest report is from 1017, when an outbreak in eastern Saxony is said to have lasted a whole year and built up to a frenzied climax. It sounds like a great festival to me. A number of possibilities have been posited, including a type of food poisoning known as ergotism, which results from eating ergot, a mould that grows on cereals and causes people to hallucinate and dance in a wild manner. Oh, give me some of that. It's also possible there could be an emotional response to a repressive society triggered by social catastrophe or hardship. In the 16th century, when belief in divine curses and bewitchments was widespread, Frau Troffea's dancing plague was attributed to satanic possession. The Christian authorities in Strasbourg decided that the only way to cure her and her fellow dancers was through religious salvation. They loaded groups of dancers onto carts and took them to local churches where priests carried out ceremonies to exorcise the evil spirits. A few decades later, in 1562, John Knox, the founder of the Presbyterian Church of Scotland, wrote that the reward of dancers will be to drink in hell. He wasn't keen on fiddling and flinging either. I'm glad I wasn't brought up in Scotland in the 16th century. I'm not sure how I would have restrained my urge to dance, particularly had I been listening to a fiddle player. By 1649, the Church of Scotland had banned dancing because it was associated with drunkenness, gluttony, immodesty and lechery. That sounds like a typical Saturday night out in most UK towns when we're not in lockdown. By 1684, distrust of dancing by puritanical Christians had spread across the Atlantic to New England. The Puritan leader, Increase Mather, was so afraid of how mixed gender and promiscuous dancing might corrupt society that he wrote a 30-page pamphlet called, wait for it, An Arrow Against Profane and Promiscuous Dancing, drawn out of the quiver of the Scriptures. Scriptures. In his fire and brimstone sermon, he preached that the unchaste touches and gesticulations used by dancers have a palpable tendency to that which is evil. The link between dancing and being evil is reinforced several times throughout the text. This must have scared the living daylights out of his audience, so that they would be too afraid to succumb to their urge to dance. That dancing bans have lasted until the present day in some parts of both the Christian and Islamic world is perhaps not so surprising. What does seem remarkable, though, is the civil ban on some forms of dancing and movement. While the faith-based bans are rooted in the notion that dancing might lead to immoral behaviour, civil bans on dancing are based on arbitrary decisions and the personal whim of rule makers, rather than any reason or system. In 2011, a magistrate in Australia told a man that he was too old to dance at a rock concert. Richard Fuller was 43 years of age at the time and had been dancing along energetically, lost in the music of Cold Chisel, his favourite band. He needed more space, so he moved to the aisle of the theatre where he could double fist pump to his heart's content. He was getting his groove on, but he never got to dance to the band's anthemic finale, as he was removed from the theatre for dancing in the aisle by the venue's security. Now, in the heat of the moment, Richard Fuller slapped one of the security guards and found himself in court, which is fair enough. Well, it's fair enough to find himself in court. Ross Mack, the magistrate, fined him $450 for common assault, but more importantly, I think, said this in his summing up, and I quote, "You are too old to dance, Mr. Fuller." Of course, I agree that Fuller deserved to be fined for slapping a security guard. There is certainly no excuse for that sort of behaviour. But to be told that you are too old to dance by a civil officer of the law sends the message, firstly, that dancing is only for the young, which is clearly wrong, and secondly, that representatives of local authorities have influence over when, how, and which people in a society should move their bodies in a particular way. Take this idea to its extreme and imagine what life would be like.